Hi, my name is Niina and you're listening Together Through the Storms podcast. Welcome to the journey with me. I would like to begin by acknowledging traditional owners of the land where I'm recording this episode today, which is the Wurrung country. I would like to pay my respects to the eldest past and present and to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people who may be listening today. Hi everyone, and thank you so much for joining me on Together Through the Storms podcast. My name is Niina, and today we'll be discussing the power of advocacy. I really hope that you all had a great weekend and you're feeling refreshed coming to the new week. If you haven't yet set intention or goal for October, I encourage you to do so. I have personally set up a few goals that I want to follow in October. It just helps me to, find my specific focus. If you haven't yet seen my goals, go to my Instagram account and you can find what I've set for myself for October and maybe get some inspiration for yourself. We have spent the weekend celebrating my oldest daughter, Missy, who turned 5, and I feel like we're all just kind of coming back from that very, very intensive celebration mood. But I'm really excited about today's episode. However, before we step into the episode, I just want to acknowledge that I feel particularly nervous being here by myself doing a solo episode. So I've been recently recording a lot of episodes with beautiful guests and learned a lot from their expertise. And I just noticed that being in this space by myself makes me feel quite vulnerable. Holding the space for my guests when they share their journey feels so much more natural than expressing my own voice. But I'm trying to embrace the discomfort that the situation brings. And I really appreciate the feedback you've been sending to me, because it really gives me strength to keep going. So today's topic is advocacy. This topic was the most popular from all the topic suggestions that I posted on Instagram when I was asking from my followers what they would like to learn more about. I really hope I can bring some kind of insights into this complex and huge concept. According to raisingchildren.net.au website, advocacy is promoting and defining persons' rights, needs, and interests. Now, it's really important to remember that all parents advocate for their children. So whether or not you have child or children with additional needs, every parent has very likely advocated for their children. So this topic is for everybody. However, families that have child or children with additional needs, advocacy is a theme that rises up every day. At least that's how I feel. If you have child or children with additional needs, this will hopefully give you reassurance and strength to keep going on your advocacy journey. I hope that this episode can make you feel that you're not alone. There's a whole village fighting the same battles. Let's get started with the episode. As always with my solo episodes, we're going to start with a quote. Today's quote comes from Pinterest, but unfortunately it's from unknown source. I just came across with this quote, and considering the topic of today, which is advocacy, I felt like this was a perfect way to summarize the advocacy journey. This is how the quote goes. I've been assigned to this mountain to show others it can be moved. Now, if you're in a safe space where it's okay for you to close your eyes for a second, please do so. And for a moment, can you travel to a very specific time when you managed to show others that a mountain can be moved? One point from your advocacy journey that you felt empowered, you felt like you were making a difference. Can you Go back to the feeling that you had in that specific moment. How did that make you feel? Perhaps it was hope, empowerment, satisfaction. Those are the moments that keep us going when the road feels very lonely, when the mountains are not moving anywhere. Can you think of a day when you didn't do any advocacy for your child with additional needs? Has there been any single day since your child was born? I think it's safe to say that advocating is a roller coaster. It can make you feel sad, defeated, disappointed, exhausted to your core. But it can also make you feel empowered. I hope you felt that going back in your memories, because I'm sure we all have those experiences where we have managed to make change. And perhaps that change wasn't only for your own child, but children that will follow. Those moments are the moments where we showed others that those mountains actually can be moved. They give you strength to carry on and keep going. I was trying to think, why does advocacy work feel so exhausting at times? And I think from my personal perspective, I feel like it's because there are so many different levels of advocacy happening all the time on a daily basis. And I thought I would approach this from my own, and divide advocacy work into 6 different streams. Firstly, we do a lot of advocacy with our extended family and with our close friends. So when a child is being diagnosed with additional needs or disabilities, it doesn't just impact us as a family, but it impacts a bigger group of people, which can be our extended family or our friends. For example, in our case, we do have our extended family, but also our friends have become our family. So everyone's situation is different, but you are the source of information for those people, especially at the start. And that can feel quite challenging. I feel like sometimes it's hard enough to keep your own partner up to date with the information, with the goals, with the adjustments that your child requires. And sharing that information with the extended family and friends can feel a bit overwhelming. Sometimes it requires new skills from the extended family and friends. And you might be the resource for them at the start. And you might be the person who guides them towards the way where they can gain more of those skills. These skills could be, for example, around communication, different tools to communicate, whether it's pictures, visuals, signs, gestures. This could also be specific medical interventions that the child requires. Also, sometimes you have to be advocating and justifying the behaviors of your child for the extended family and friends. And that can feel a bit overwhelming because you are trying to explain on behalf of your child that they're not trying to be rude or disrespectful, for example, but there is actually a reason behind their behavior. If you don't understand the disability, it's hard to understand the behavior. For example, in our girls' case, they don't often respond to greetings, and that can feel quite rude to other people. My role is to advocate for our extended family and our friends that although they're not responding, it's not because they want to be rude, and you can still say hello to them, you can still talk to them. And of course, I encourage my girls to talk and say hello, but I also know that no good comes from forcing them to do certain things such as say hello. Sometimes it's also hard to explain to your extended family and friends how much hard work goes behind each skill, and that although your child might not be there yet, it doesn't mean that you're not constantly practicing it. As an example, my girls use a very simple sentence structure a lot these days, which they have quite recently learned, and that is I want or I don't want. Developmentally, that's quite significant learning because they can express themselves and their wants and needs in a very simple way. But from society's perspective, it can come across quite rude when they say, I want something. And while we're trying to teach them by using signs and gestures and words to use the sentence structure, can I please have, for example, that's our ultimate goal. But we're not there yet. And in the meanwhile, the skill that they have mastered, which is using the sentence structure I want or I don't want, is already part of the learning process. So we're celebrating that they have reached that goal. However, we're mindful that we want to take them to the level where they can express their needs and wants in a more polite way. And we're working towards that. The work that we do with our children is not always visible for others. And explaining that, justifying that can sometimes feel quite exhausting. The second and very important space where a lot of advocacy is needed is with peers and friends. Other children are naturally curious and very innocent, and they just have a lot of questions and wonderings. I personally feel like it's so important to create space where those questions and wonderings can be discussed. In one of my previous episodes, I shared some examples of how I have come across questions from peers before. Other children have asked some very curious, very innocent questions about my girls' cochlear implants and the lights in them. And I find those questions extremely important. And sometimes it's hard to respond on the spot. And it's always easy to look back and think, oh, I wish I would have said and done that. But I feel like I'm learning as I go to be more prepared to have those conversations in unexpected times, unexpected places. My motto is that it's better to have those conversations than not to have them. I also know that lots of our friends are having those conversations with their children on behalf of us. So the advocacy work is not only on our shoulders, but the people around us are also having these conversations with their children to increase understanding, to build more inclusive approach. If a parent or teacher is unsure how to address some of the questions and wonderings that their children might have, I'm always happy to be approached. And I'm sure lots of families who have child with additional needs share this same experience. And I know lots of people even go into daycares or kinders or schools to spread that awareness. So I always encourage to reach out and ask those questions if you're unsure how to respond. We're always happy to help. The third space where we do a lot of advocacy work is the community around us. So yes, we have our extended family, our closest friends, but then there's a community that will be entering on a daily basis, whether it's a trip to the supermarket, in after-school activities where you are interacting with the community. All children with additional needs and disabilities are different, and their needs are very individual. For some children, their individual needs are very visible, whereas for others, you might not be able to identify them so easily. And of course, people are curious. So whether it's something very concrete that you can see or whether it's something less noticeable, the level of advocating that you might be required to do in the community can vary a lot. And I feel like in this space, the best lesson that I have personally learned is to choose my audience, particularly when the girls were young. Lots of people were very curious about their hearing aids and the bonnets they were wearing around their head to keep the hearing aids in place. Especially older people made comments about the bonnets, how cute they were, or why they were wearing a bonnet. And at the start, I was always telling the whole story. They have a hearing loss, they're wearing hearing aids, and so on. But at some point, I realized that this is exhausting. It's exhausting to repeat the story every single time that somebody in the community says something. So to save my own energy, I decided that I can choose when I share the story and when I don't. And as I said before, I think advocating is like a skill that you learn as the journey goes along. This was my lesson that I learned, that I need to protect my energy and I don't always need to share the entire story with the people in the community, because not every person shares the same values, the same understanding, and the same respectful perspective as we would wish them to. The fourth setting where we do a great amount of advocacy work is educational setting. Now, I feel like advocating in an educational setting can be very successful if there is consistency within the educators and if the educators recognize and embrace the value of inclusion. If these two elements are in place, I feel like there's a lot of success happening with your advocacy. Luckily, many of us are not forced to do all the advocating by ourselves in the educational settings. So we have early intervention providers who provide support at daycare and kinder environments, and lots of different supports available. Unfortunately, the road can still feel quite lonely. The fifth space where we do a lot of advocating is amongst the healthcare professionals and specialists. Now, this can sometimes feel relatively tricky work, and I really acknowledge that everyone's experience in this space is so different depending on the individual needs that child has. I can only look at this from my limited experience. I have heard from so many parents how incredibly hard it is to get initial appointment, to get tested, to receive a diagnosis, and in general to be taken seriously. And I really feel for you. A lot of parents that have child or children with additional needs had to really strongly listen to their intuition and their gut feeling. And if that told them that something was not right, they just had to push for it, to be seen, to be recognized, to be tested. I feel like this space is a lot about finding your own voice, finding your strength, finding your intuition and that gut feeling. Advocating for your child in the healthcare professional space can feel very exhausting because you're constantly trying to prove that your child is special enough, and you're pointing out the challenges rather than looking at the strengths and potential that your child has. And that makes the advocacy work so much harder. The last space where I feel that advocacy is so important is developing your child's self-advocacy skills. Now, self-advocacy can be considered as ability to express one's needs. So your child is learning to understand what they need in order to learn and operate in the space they are at and ask for those supports. As my oldest daughter is entering school next year, I have become very mindful that I want her to be equipped with skills that help her to self-advocate, because I won't always be there to support her. It's so important to build our children's advocacy skills early on by explaining them things and giving them responsibility in an age-appropriate way. Self-advocacy builds from very small things. It's also learning to recognize and celebrate when your child has learned self-advocacy skills and being responsive for those skills. The last space where I feel that advocacy is so important is developing your child's self-advocacy skills. Now, self-advocacy can be considered as ability to express one's needs. So your child is learning to understand what they need in order to learn and operate in the space they are at and ask for those supports. One recent milestone that we have achieved with our daughters is them both learning to ask and sign what. So when they can't understand what I'm saying, they recognize that and they would sign and say what. I know this sounds so insignificant skill, but for us, it's a huge milestone because it means that my daughter can understand when she can't understand something and she has the confidence to ask again. She has confidence to ask to repeat what you just said in order for her to understand what she just missed out. And this is something that makes us very proud. Self-advocacy builds from small things. And even very young children can start developing those skills when given the opportunity. Lastly, I would like to provide some practical tips that have helped me in the advocacy work. I love different lists and notebooks, so I often take lists of questions with me to the appointments. That helps me in the moment when I might feel slightly overwhelmed, and I don't have to rely only on my memory in that specific moment. Now, if you don't understand something, make sure that you ask again. There's absolutely no shame in that. It's very important that you can understand all the provided information. You can also ask if there's a way to provide the information in a written form. The next one is quite huge. Just remember, you don't have to do all of this by yourself. Ask some help. I've found this particularly helpful in some of the bigger meetings that we've had. And I've had, for example, early intervention provider with me in that meeting advocating. It makes such a difference when you have someone in that meeting who you know is going to be in your corner. Think of ways how you can easily share information with family, with friends, with educational settings. I created some templates at the start of our journey that were helpful and updated them as the journey kind of changed a bit. I also made some little books about my girl, almost like a little manual that said things they like, things they don't like, key signs that they use, what they like to eat, what they like to do. This was at the early stages when they didn't have as much tools to communicate. The next one is so important, and I just can't highlight it enough. Reach out to the community. There are people out there that have lived experience, and that can be very helpful when you are advocating for your child. So reach out, find your tribe. And lastly, I just want to remind you that you don't need to have every single person in that setting in your corner. Target the people that are open to inclusion and trust the process. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode about advocacy. I hope that this episode has made you feel a little bit less lonely, a bit more empowered, and perhaps you got one or two tips that might help you on your advocacy journey. Just remember, no journey is the same. These were all just my experiences. If you know someone who would love to listen to this episode, feel free to share this. Also, I would love if you'd give me a like on Spotify. Feel free to send any feedback, questions, and even your own experiences around advocacy into my Instagram account, Together Through the Storms. And I will see you all back here next week. Have a great week, everyone. Take care.